Hello, third video lesson on the essay The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction by Walter Benjamin. So in this video, we will look at sections 10 to 13 of the essay. In the previous two videos, we had looked at the earlier sections, and we know that the main point that Benjamin is trying to make in this essay is that traditional works of art had something called aura or authenticity because of its genuineness, which is something that cannot be copied, that cannot be reproduced. However, with technological reproduction, with mechanical reproduction, a new set of works of art are being produced which do not have this aura precisely because there is no original, so to speak. Case of photography or cinema, the end products that we see, the photograph or the film, can be reproduced as many times as necessary from a film negative. And there is no original photograph or no original film except for that negative, which is not the work of art. It is still part of the apparatus. And from that film negative, you can create as many copies of a photograph or of that film as necessary. And each of those photographs or films will have the exact same quality. So there is no original which has an aura. Rather, we have an infinite number of copies which are all similar or identical. And this kind of a process of creating a proliferation of works of art through mechanical reproduction and the loss of aura thereby leads to art coming closer to the masses, to the ordinary people, to the common people. This has been the main theme of Benjamin's essay. Now in this section, in this video, we will look a little bit more closely at what he's saying about cinema. So we start with section 10. And in this section, he talks about the loss of aura and how that affects cinema. He says that the cult of stardom and the inflation of personality is film's answer to the shriveling of aura and the alienation faced by the actor whose mechanically reproduced image is circulated in front of the audience in his absence. So in the previous video we had talked about, first of all, how even with the coming of photography, aura did not completely fade, and it remained in the portrait photographs, in the photographs of the human face, and we would keep those photographs with us, photographs of somebody who's close to us, who has either left us or who has passed away, and we would still feel that some element of that person's aura is contained in this photograph. But then slowly, with the photography of streets and other kind of landscapes which had no human face, which had no human figure to anchor them, this aura started to fade completely. This is something that we have already learnt. Also, we talked about how the Italian playwright Pirandello spoke about how the film actor as well as the film audience face a certain kind of alienation. And this alienation is because the film actor acts in front of a camera. He is acting for the audience, but the audience is not in front of him when he is acting. The audience is not present. The audience is absent. Similarly, when the film is displayed to the audience, the actor is not present. Only his image is reproduced and presented in front of them. So all this leads to a kind of alienation. But according to Benjamin, film has a certain answer to that problem of alienation. How in early Hollywood films, even in contemporary cinema, we have this cult of film stars, stardom. So stars become a kind of cultic figures. So remember, Benjamin had Now, cultic value is created by some other means. And that is how in cinema, even though there is an alienation and loss of aura, the film tries to compensate for that by presenting us with these film stars who have some kind of cultic value because of their personality, because of their stardom. So that is one way in which film tries to counter the loss of aura. And according to Benjamin, this is happening because film is ultimately caught up, at least in Western countries, in America and Europe, film is caught up in the processes of capitalism. So capitalism does not want to completely give up control. It doesn't want to give up the aura completely. So because if the aura is completely lost, then the work of art will be there with the masses and it will have social value, and the masses can do anything with it. They can transform society, they can revolutionize society, and this is something that capitalism would not be interested in. So therefore, stardom. Then, however, Benjamin says, even though this is so, even though film doesn't completely give up its aura, there is a certain massification that film produces. It is not just the fact that the film can be reproduced multiple times and shown to multiple people. It's not just that. But he says everyone who watches a film can be a film critic. That is true. Everybody who watches a film has some opinion to make on the film, has something to say about the film. And so, therefore, earlier an art critic would be only a person who is highly educated and sophisticated and who has a lot of degrees perhaps in that art form. Whereas now, because a film is addressed to the masses can say whatever they like about the film. So everybody who watches a film can be a film critic. Similarly, so here he's saying that the distinction between the ordinary viewer and the critical viewer is fading a little bit. Similarly, he says anyone who gets caught up in a film shooting can suddenly be promoted to a film extra. So, again, the distinction between a film actor and an ordinary person, between an actor and a viewer, may also fade away quickly, because you may be walking around in the road and without your knowledge, you might get caught up in a film shooting and your figure might appear somewhere on the screen. So, these are things that can happen in filmmaking. So if a crowd scene is being shot or a street scene is being shot and you pass by that scene just as it is being shot, you will become part of that film. So you are actually just a viewer. You are not a filmmaker, you are not a film actor, but you still might get caught up in that film. And therefore, the distinction between the film actor and the film viewer can also fade. All these are possible because of the technology used to create film, because of the camera. Because if you are a painter, suppose a painter is painting a scene and somebody is walking there, somebody who was not supposed to be there is walking there, the painter will easily just avoid painting that person. But in cinema, because you use camera, or in photography also, you know there is something called photo bombing. This is a term that is used a lot nowadays. When somebody is composing a photograph and taking a photograph and somebody else enters that photo without the knowledge of the photographer or without planning to, that is called photobombing. We use that term nowadays. So it's something very similar. If it's a camera, then it has that possibility that it will catch something which was not supposed to be in that scene. And now he says this is not something that suddenly happened with photography or film. Even in literature, you can see how this distinction between the reader and writer slowly fades. Initially, in literature, a small number of writers faced a multitude of readers. There were a few writers and many readers. And then with the printing press, obviously the number of readers increased exponentially. But similarly, with the growth of the printing press and its proliferation and printing technology becoming available to everyone, in the form of newspapers or even typewriters and other things like that, more and more readers became writers. So, for example, somebody would read a story in a magazine, and then they might write a letter to the editor of the magazine giving their opinion about the story. Letters to the editor or complaint letters. Everybody can write a complaint letter. You might, if you're a worker, you might write a complaint letter to your boss, to your employer, or you might have watched a film or read a story or anything, and you can always write a letter in response to that. So more and more people are writing, and therefore the distinction between readers and writers, according to Benjamin, is in the process of losing its fundamental character. So who is a reader, who is a writer, it's not so clear anymore. In the case of literature, the erasure of this distinction took several years, maybe centuries. However, in the case of cinema, all this is happening much, much sooner because of the technology. And Benjamin, in this context, cites Russian cinema. Here he's talking about what is called socialist realism, which was a genre of cinema, Russian cinema, that was prevalent in Soviet Russia during the 1930s when he was writing this, in which he says actors don't portray characters, but rather actors portray themselves through their own labor. So, in certain kinds of socialist realist cinema, they are about the ordinary people. So instead of creating a film about a character and asking an actors to act as those characters, to perform as those characters, the film will just go. If the film is about a particular factory, they will go to that factory and they will interview the workers there, or they will shoot the workers doing what they normally do. So there is no distinction between an ordinary person and an actor in these kinds of socialist realist films. So this is something that Benjamin is posing in opposition to the Hollywood star system, because in the case of the star system, there is the film is still trying to maintain a distinction between the actor who is a star, actor or actress who is a star, and the film viewer who is a fan of that star. But according to Benjamin, in Russian cinema, you can see the erasure of this happening because many of the ordinary people themselves become actors in a film by portraying themselves, not some other character. In the next section, Benjamin talks about certain technological aspects of photography and cinema, especially cinema. He contrasts cinema with other art forms like theatre and painting, which is something that he does throughout this essay. And he concludes that what separates cinema from theatre and painting is the camera free aspect of reality that cinema provides. The camera free aspect of reality. What does he mean by this? Now, theatre producers are always conscious of external elements around the stage, like lighting fixtures or some props that are not needed for that particular scene, and extras and people pulling the curtains and things like that. These are external elements and they should not be in that particular scene. So theatre producers are always aware that there is a certain space, which is the stage, a certain aspect of the stage which should be visible to the audience, and there are certain aspects which should not be visible. And the production always keeps in mind a focal point from where these external elements would not be visible as intruding on the performance. So if you imagine a traditional stage, you will realize that the lighting and many other aspects, many other things are kept. Suppose you need some wind and you keep a fan on the side to create a wind. You will put the fan in such a way that it cannot be seen by the audience, because otherwise the sense of realism will be gone. If the audience can see how the technology works in theatre, then they will no longer be able to enjoy the actual the finished product, the drama. However, in cinema, this is not possible. While shooting, you Don't keep the camera and lights and everything completely separate, and then you have a certain space where a person acts. No, the camera can maybe even go around the person. It can shoot from so many different angles. The camera, according to Benjamin, penetrates so deeply into reality that a special procedure is necessary later to create the camera free aspect of reality, and this special procedure is called editing. So the camera will shoot a lot of things, and sometimes things that are not supposed to be there will also become part of that frame. But then there is a process later called editing, through which those kind of elements can be expunged, can be erased. Now, let us look at, very briefly, let us look at an editing studio. What happens there? On the left side, you can see a traditional, an early editing studio where the editors, you can see the early editors were mostly women, and these studios were called cutting rooms. And what they are doing is they're taking a film reel and they are physically observing it, and they will cut out those frames of the reel which have external elements or which are overexposed or underexposed or in some way inessential. They will cut out those frames, and then they will paste. So they will cut them with scissors and then they will paste them together so that the reel can run continuously. On the right hand side, you can see a much more modern contemporary editing table where all the same things, cutting and pasting and even sound mixing and special effects, all these can be created, but not physically but virtually through the computer. Anyway, so that is about film editing. Now let us look at some examples of what Benjamin is talking about when he talks about external elements impinging on the product. Here we can see a scene from the 2002 movie Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Now this scene is it is supposed to be taking place in a magical school, and all the children are the pupils of that magical school. But on the left hand side, you can see within that little yellow circle, you can see there is a cameraman and the camera. They have somehow become part of this scene. So you can imagine that there are maybe two cameras used to shoot this scene, and we are seeing this scene from the perspective of camera A. Let's call it camera A. And there is camera B, which is shooting from the other side. But accidentally, the cameraman and camera B have become part of this scene. Now, this is not intentional, and however, if this is something like this is not caught by the editor, it will become part of the finished product and it will look very funny. It will actually take away the realism of that scene. I will give you another more current example. This is a scene from the HBO series called Game of Thrones, which was a medieval fantasy series set in an alternative history, kind of a medieval land. It's a fantasy land, it's not a real place, but it is based on medieval Europe. And in the final season of this series, a funny thing happened which was caught by online fans, which is that a coffee cup left by a crew member appears in front of the main character. You can see the coffee cup in the little red circle. However, because this was caught and pointed out and criticized by fans, the studio, that is HBO, released a new version, an edited version of the same scene with the coffee cup erased. So here you can see side by side the image. On the left side, the image with the coffee cup. This is before editing, and on the right side we can see the exact same frame with the coffee cup edited. So this is something that editing can do. So the camera free aspect of reality is created not just by the camera but by this entire technology called editing. So shooting and editing have to go hand in hand, and this is what actually creates that realism in cinema or photography. Continuing this section in the same vein, Benjamin compares the painter to a magician or faith healer. So far he was distinguishing between theater and cinema. Now he is comparing painting with cinema. So here he compares the painter to a magician or a faith healer, and the camera operator to a surgeon operating on the body. What does he mean by this? What the magician or faith healer does is, if there is a person who is not well, who is ill, and who is brought before the magician will lay his hands on the deceased body and claim to cure it. However, what the surgeon does is he will operate on the body, he will penetrate into the body, and with a lot of care, he will surgically remove the cause of the illness. If there is a stone in the gallbladder, for example, the surgeon will surgically remove it. If there is a problem with your appendix, the surgeon will remove it, those kind of things. Now, both the painter and the magician, according to Benjamin, they maintain a natural distance from their objects, both physically and in terms of their aura or authority. So, even when the magician lays his hands on the body, he is still separated from that deceased body by the fact that he has an aura, he has an authority, because he is the magician, because he is the healer, and the aura is something that separates him from the body in front of him, from the ill person in front of him. And this is exactly how it works for painting. The painter and the painting remain very far away, very distant from the viewer. However, and also the object that the painter is painting, the painter will be far away from it. He will observe it from afar, and then he will try to create it in his canvas. So there is a kind of distance that is necessary in painting. But the camera operator is like a surgeon. Just like the surgeon even moves inside your body, the camera operator moves within the object. So if a scene is being shot, the camera will not just capture that scene from outside, but sometimes the camera will be moving around the people, it will be moving among the people and the objects, including the props, the sets, the landscape, etc., which are being shot. So these are some ways in which Benjamin distinguishes between film on the one hand and painting and theatre on the other hand. In the next section, Benjamin talks about how the technological reproduction of the work of art alters the relationship of the masses, the ordinary people, the common people, to art. We have already said that technological reproduction brings the art object, brings the artwork closer to people, and the loss of the cultic value will increase the display value and later the use value of this work of art. We have already said that, but how exactly does it change our own perception of the audience of this work of art, of those who receive this work of art? And he says that the same mass that would have seemed very backward in its appreciation of a painting by Pablo Picasso suddenly seems very progressive in its appreciation of a film by Charlie Chaplin. Here on the left side, the horizontal image you see is that of the painting, the famous painting Guernica by the artist Pablo Picasso. And he has painted this in a model which comes to be in a style which would come to be known as Cubism. And an ordinary viewer seeing this will not understand anything. An ordinary viewer will wonder, what on earth is this painting? They are not used to this kind of the style of painting called cubism or modernism or surrealism, and they would be completely at sea, completely bewildered, completely confused if they see this painting. But the same people, so because they don't understand painting, the mass would be considered backward, culturally backward. But on the right hand side, we have this vertical image of Charlie Chaplin. And the films of Charlie Chaplin is something that anybody can understand. And the masses, the same mass who would seem backward by not understanding Guernica, would seem very progressive because they can not just understand, they can even critically evaluate the films of Charlie Chaplin. So therefore, Benjamin says that The art forms that are created by technological reproduction not just come closer to the masses, they also change the relationship of the masses to the art form itself. Whereas earlier with traditional art forms, the masses were passive receivers and they were in many times considered backward because they wouldn't understand what is happening in that artwork. Now with cinema, and you should keep in mind that Benjamin is talking about this early cinema, but with cinema, it becomes something that everybody can enjoy, appreciate, and even critique. And Benjamin goes on to say, as the social significance of art diminishes, the greater the extent to which the critical and pleasure seeking stances of the public diverge. The conventional is enjoyed without criticism, the truly new is criticized with aversion. And he says that the critical and pleasure seeking stances of the public. So, within the public, there are some people who will view any artwork critically. That is, they will think about it and they will ponder on it, they will reflect on it. No matter what artwork is, they will view it critically. There is another section who will only look at it for pleasure, for enjoyment. And these are two different stances of the public, two different aspects. And sometimes they can come together, but sometimes they will be divergent. And he says that as the social significance of art diminishes, when the art is no longer socially significant, and here he is talking about traditional art, art which has a lot of aura, then the distance between these two stances will be greater. So, for an artwork like Picasso's Guernica, there will be a great difference between how the critics look at it and how the ordinary people look at it. And this, he says, is because those artworks have higher cultic value, higher aura, maybe even higher display value, but lower social significance. Whereas in cinema, the masses are able, he says that the distinction between the critics watching a Charlie Chaplin film and the ordinary people watching a Charlie Chaplin film is much less. That distance is much lesser, and people, or even ordinary people, will be able to watch it with the same kind of, they will be able to critique it just like the critics, and critics will be able to enjoy it as much as the ordinary people. Another point that he makes is that in cinema, the reaction of the mass audience is a convergence of individual reactions, but their massing is an important factor. It's not that we all sit and watch films separately. He's talking especially about early cinema, where everybody, a lot of people would sit together in a theater and watch it. And while watching, we react to each other's reactions. The audience members react to one another's reactions. So the enjoyment I get from watching a film as part of a large audience, or my view of that film, is not just an individual one. It is also formed by seeing what people around me are saying about this film. Are they laughing? Then maybe I will laugh. If I'm watching the same scene alone, I may not find it so funny. But if I'm watching it in a large group and everybody is laughing, maybe I will also laugh. It can work in so many different ways. But basically, a film's audience in a theater watching as part of a large audience, they will react not just to the film but also to each other's reactions. And this kind of mass spectatorship is impossible in most other art forms like painting. It is still possible to some extent in theater, but Benjamin considers cinema to be the epitome of this kind of mass spectatorship. Now, in the next section, 13th section, Benjamin talks about how film makes a certain detailed kind of analysis of the artwork possible. So he says that just as Freudian psychoanalysis has increased the focus on verbal errors in conversation, that is the notion of the Freudian slip, Similarly, film allows us to pay attention to details in the performance and in the surroundings being portrayed and to analyze them more precisely. So, before Freudian psychoanalysis, if we are having a conversation with someone and we make a slip of the tongue, that will go unnoticed or unobserved, at least. Nobody will comment on that. But after Freud came up with the idea that the Freudian slip, this kind of conversational slip, a verbal error, is something coming from the unconscious, then we start paying more attention to such verbal conversational errors. Similarly, with film, we have more time and more detail that is given to us. So, close up shots, and we already mentioned slow motion shots and things like that, will allow us to observe the things that are portrayed in film, the objects, the people's performances, the surroundings, everything in greater detail, which means we can also analyze them more precisely. And Benjamin considers one of the most revolutionary aspects of film to be that it renders the artistic and scientific uses of photography recognizably identical, which means that Benjamin says that photography has an artistic use and a scientific use. The artistic use is of course connected to its display value. It is aesthetic. You look at a photograph and you appreciate it for its beauty and for what it portrays. That is the artistic use of photography. But photography can also have scientific uses. Suppose you are a botanist and you are taking a photo, you have taken a photo of a certain flower or a leaf, then you can observe that photo. You can take that photo, keep it, look at it later, and you can observe it for scientific details. So, this is a scientific use of photography. And film, according to Benjamin, puts these two together. It renders the artistic and scientific uses of photography identical, almost identical. And he says that just like Freudian psychoanalysis showed us the compulsive unconscious, that there is an unconscious within us which comes out in our errors of conversation, in our verbal slippages. Similarly, the camera shows us the optical unconscious, optical as related to our vision, eyesight. So, that there are many things around us which we do not focus on. So, if we, even though we can see all those things around us with our optical vision, we don't focus on them. But the camera, with its techniques, makes it possible for us to focus on those things which we normally do not focus on, and thus allows us to look at them in greater detail. Thus, film makes us take a second look at familiar spaces like streets, pubs, offices, factories, and railway stations and realize things about them that we did not know previously. So, that is one important thing that film does with the help of its technology. And Benjamin says the close up expands space as the slow motion sequence dilates movement. So, the close up shot expands space. So there is a space, and if you have a long shot of it, then you can see it, the entire space. But when you go closer to it, when you have a close-up shot, when you zoom into it, then that space is completely expanded and you can see every small detail in that space. Then slow motion sequences. Somebody is walking, but when you shoot that and show it in slow motion, then you can see every little aspect of that movement. It dilates movement. Movement is normally fast. It is in real time. But when it is slowed up, you can see every little angle, every change in posture, and every aspect of that movement. So space and movement are not just captured and represented to us as they are, but they are expanded, they are dilated, and we are able to observe them and analyze them very precisely using the technological possibilities of the camera. And Benjamin says that these techniques like slow motion, close up, etc., do not just clarify what we know anyway. So it is not like we get to look once more at the things that we already know, but rather these techniques bring out postures and movements that are completely unfamiliar to us, making it possible for us to appreciate these minute details. So when somebody is, if you are, for example, you take a video of a cricket match where somebody is bowling. If you show it in real time, you just see the bowler running up and throwing the ball. But if you show it in slow motion, you can see every aspect of that bowler's run up technique, the way he or she holds their head, the way they hold the ball, the way the entire posture of their body, how far they leap up when they jump to throw the ball, etc. All these things. And if you have the close up technique, you can see exactly how that person holds the ball. So these are maybe new kinds of knowledge to us, not necessarily things that we already know. So if you just see that bowler coming in real time in a normal way, you will think that I know everything about how that person is running. But these techniques actually make us realize that we do not know a lot of things, and they reveal a lot of new information to us. So these are also some ways in which film not only has an aesthetic aspect but also has a scientific aspect, which allows us to understand and analyze things in great precision. So we will stop here for now. I hope this video has been more or less clear, and we will continue in the next video, which will be the fourth and last video on the text of this essay. Thank you so much.